Hello, welcome to the Spiritual Brainstorm episode 11. This time I'd like to talk about two topics. First of all, this question of finding meaning and what is important in life. The need for every human to feel valued, valuable, that they make a difference, that they do make a positive contribution to the world, and how can you reconcile this necessity with trying to find an objective way of what is important in life. And the second topic is whether ultimately ending misery is a goal which should be achieved in this quest, in the spiritual journey. And so I'll start with the first one. What is important? So in our current modern societies, there are many criteria and so-called objective criteria for determining what is important or what is considered to be a valuable contribution to our society. And this quest for feeling valued, being rewarded for being someone that does something valuable for the world. The problem with that is that it always has to be measurable. And so you have to have indicators to measure whether someone is valuable or whether they make a positive difference. So our society has certain norms over what is considered a positive contribution. And one of the main criteria is that it has to be measurable. If you can't measure the impact of what you're doing, then there's no way that anyone can say that you've done something positive. So, for instance, in sports, that is very prevalent, and you have many different criteria for determining who's the best. There's this idea of rank and hierarchy, and it's about goals, it's about passes, it's about all kinds of measurements of your performance to determine just how valuable you are. And the same applies to science, where people measure academic papers published, peer-reviewed, or, for instance, what kind of goods or technology has been developed from your ideas and your papers. When you're a lawyer, how many cases did you defend? If you're a doctor, how many patients have you managed to fix up? And so again, this is this race after being recognized, recognition, which in a certain way is just simply a quest for love. The fact of feeling worthy of being loved. And it's just a very, this quest for objectively measurable, valuable contribution is just a sort of a infinitely more complex form than what you're being taught as a child. For instance, when you're a child, it's about things that the child can actually measure. Were you, for instance, did you clean up? Did you clean up your room? Then you could get a kiss. You get love. If you didn't, you don't get kisses. Did you get good grades? Then you have access to love if you did. If you didn't get good grades, then you're punished. Did you manage to, I don't know, did you put the dishes away in the dishwasher? And so it's always about achieving something. And so you build up all of these societal norms to measure who's valuable and who's not. Now, the biggest problem with this is that ultimately, it is impossible at our human level, to determine all of the ramifications of any action. Because any action reverberates and creates an infinite number of sets of causes and effects in chain. There's this chain reaction from any action that you do, which reverberates infinitely into the future, and there's no way that you can test or know what is going to be the consequence of this. And so, faced with this problem, people just focus on what is measurable at our human level and say all the rest can be ignored, only what's measurable is valuable. The problem with that is that ultimately it can completely lead you astray in regards as to how you should live your life, what is important, what you should be focused on, and this idea of being constantly stressed or under pressure that if you don't perform, if you don't do something, if you don't act in a certain way, or if you're not inside the norm, then you cannot get love. You're not worthy of love. You have no self-worth. And basically just chasing after recognition and being miserable, and even many people are depressed at this point because they don't feel like they're valuable. They don't feel like they are up to par with what the expectation of society is. And I'll just give you two examples, for instance, or a few examples here to illustrate how important it is to understand that we are completely blind as to understanding how our actions reverberate into the future. First of all, we don't have parallel universes to test different outcomes of two different actions. And so, many people play with counterfactuals. Like, for instance, if Hitler was admitted to his art school, maybe we could have avoided World War II. Who knows? And of course, since we don't have a parallel universe where everything is the same except Adolf Hitler was admitted to an art school, you cannot know how it would have played out. But of course, people like to pretend as if they knew. Of course, it's an interesting intellectual exercise and stimulating, and it can help in trying to navigate into the future. But it's by no means certain, and we have to admit our own limits as to this process. And so these infinite outcomes, for instance, to give you just two examples, imagine that you have this one scientist, and he is going to invent an energy efficient some kind of energy efficient technology which is revolutionary, which is going to solve many problems. And then on the other hand, you have like one cashier, done nothing, no studies, anything during her life. And of course, if you ask anyone which one of these is the most needed in our society or the most valuable, people would pick the scientist. But here's the thing. Imagine that when this scientist was about to have his major breakthrough, this cashier was late for work one day, and she bumped, oops, into this scientist. She didn't watch where she was going, just slammed it into him, and that made that scientist about 2.38 seconds late, strolling, going to work. And those 2.38 seconds made him miss the collision with a motorcycle which was going around the corner, not paying too much attention to pedestrians. And so perhaps this cashier, the most meaningful thing that she has done in her whole life is to bump into this guy, saving his life. Of course, the scientist is not aware of that happened. He's just annoyed that he's been bumped into, and thus enabling him to invent this energy efficiency. And so what I mean by this is that it's impossible. We're all entangled. All of humanity, everything, all of the universe actually, is entangled in an infinite causal chains that reverberate all the way into the beginning of the universe, and that reverberate all the way into the future and to the end of the universe. And there's no way that you can isolate any one and say that this is valuable in and of itself, disconnected from anything else. And what I was saying, that maybe that was her only purpose, that was not to say that all the rest that she's doing is useless, but it's more to free people, to free people's minds of whether they're worthy or not. What I mean by this is that if this was her most important defining moment, she probably wasn't aware of it, or he probably wasn't aware of it, the cashier. And the rest of all the rest that cashier is doing in his or her life, perhaps it's just a bonus. Perhaps it's just gratis. It's just for fun. It's just for fun. It's just extra stuff that you can do besides playing this vital role of bumping into this scientist. And so the point I'm trying to make is that everyone, every single person is valuable, intrinsically valuable. Because simply, if you didn't exist, then there is one part of this infinite causal chain which would be broken. And who knows how that would reverberate into everything that's happening. Some would say that it would be insignificant, but as I've shown you, any seemingly insignificant action can have infinitely serious and severe ramifications, even the most insignificant. Just the fact of smiling to a random person in the street may, for instance, may have been somebody that was about to consider doing a mass shooting, and the mere fact that you smiled at that person when your eyes crossed perhaps set that person off to a different path, and you wouldn't even know that was the case and that happened. And so when I'm saying it's freeing people, it's enabling people to have self-worth and know that they are worthy of love, regardless of what they actually do. That's not important, what they do, because ultimately you are completely blind and ignorant as to what is important, quote unquote, and what isn't. Perhaps all the rest is, it's just like, think about this example, it's almost like a video game where you just have one main mission and all the rest are side quests, which are just there for you to have fun. Now, if you don't know what the main mission is, you could take those side quests very, very seriously. You could say, oh my God, I have to go to work, I have to do this, I have to file papers, I have to. And you might think that the side quest is the main quest, is the main mission. Perhaps you've already filled your main mission. You don't even know it. And you're taking those side quests so seriously when you could just do something else, do whatever you want. So the takeaway here is to follow your passion. When I said that we are blind, when I said that we're blind to these infinite causal chains, I believe actually that God or infinity has imbued us with feelings, emotions, and passions, or the fact that you feel something is right or you want to do something, that's not there by chance. This is a navigation tool to navigate in infinite possibilities and to get closer to having fun on the side quests or having fun as simply being yourself, because ultimately the main mission, what is important, you might completely be blind to what it is, but it will happen. It will happen regardless of what you do or don't do. So that cashier would have bumped into that scientist regardless. There's like an infinite number. You could say that the universe is so smart that there's an infinite number of parallel realities or timelines that lead to this one moment where that cashier bumps into that scientist, and then the universe splits again into an infinite number of timelines and causal chains. But that moment was really important, and it made sure that you got there, regardless of what you did, whether you were a cashier or a musician or a lawyer or whatever it is. Of course, this is just an example, but just to say that whatever is important is being taken care of. This is okay, it's being taken care of. You don't even need to worry about that. What you can worry about, though, is to have fun on the side quests, being who you feel you want to be. Here's a little fun anecdote to show you, to illustrate this whole idea of the fact that we're completely blind to what is important in life. Some while ago, I did a remix when I was a teenager. I was about 20 years old. That was more than 15 years ago. I did a remix of a cartoon song, cartoon theme song, as a techno remix, because I was into techno back then. And just last month, there's this guy that contacts me on Facebook and says, hey, sorry to bother you, but are you the one that did this remix 15 years back? And I said, well, yes, why are you asking? And he said, well, thank you so much. I'm really, really grateful to you, because it really got me through some very difficult times during my teenage years. And it's a real honor to meet you. Back in the days when I did this remix, I had no idea who was going to listen to it, what kind of impact it would have. I was just having fun. I wasn't even thinking. Just did it, released it, and have it live its own life. And so you see, 15 years later now, I have someone that comes and say, this was really, really important and meaningful for me. And it made a real difference in my life. And I only know 15 years later. So if everyone has to wait for 15 years to know that whatever they've done in the past was meaningful, and feeling miserable for 15 years before having that one shot of adrenaline and saying, "Oh, maybe I'm worthy after all of being loved and I have purpose and whatever," that's a pretty bad situation. So it's best to just start with a premise that you have self worth no matter what, that all of this is taken care of, and you just do whatever you feel like doing, and you don't need to know what's going to happen, and just trust that it will have the intended impact, positive impact for people. As long as your intentions are there, you have positive intentions when doing it, don't worry about the rest. And this is just one example of something that I got feedback on. But who is to tell the millions and millions and millions of actions that we do every day, every single person, and what kind of influence it can have on others? So now that's done with that topic. And I wanted to address this one last thing is, should the end goal of humanity is to end misery, end sadness? If you followed my series, I do talk a lot about humanity behaving like one global organism in harmony. But this may actually sound like a kind of enlightened dictatorship. And that's not at all what I have in mind, of course. But many people could try to interpret that as an enlightened dictatorship. Kind of like communism, I guess, which was ultimately this ideology was about achieving a state of harmony, equality, where everyone would be happy. And of course, this is not at all what it means. Actually, what I believe is that in human rights, I think the right to be miserable is as much a fundamental right as any other right. Because ultimately you cannot prevent any single human from feeling miserable or feeling sad, regardless of what you do, regardless of the kind of policies that you put in place, regardless of the kind of system that exists. Humans will always find a way, if they really want to feel miserable, not loved enough, not enough friends, lost, don't have meaning. And I think that's totally fine. I think that ultimately what I'm trying to achieve is to create a system which doesn't make it easier to be either happy or miserable. The current system, which is capitalism, at least on the material front, makes it exponentially easier to get rich, to have more and more material wealth and success. The richer you get, the richer you'll become. So obviously with dividends and all this stuff, you can just capitalize on your gains. And so there's this saying that the first $1 million is difficult. All of the rest is just, investments and laying back and see those millions roll in. It's a bit more complex than that, but basically that's the thing. And it also makes it exponentially easy to get poor. That is, once you fall into poverty, then it's like a vicious spiral which drags you down. And so there is this kind of exacerbation one way or the other in terms of material security, let's say. And the kind of system that I would like to put into place is to really enable happiness or sadness or feeling miserable. Neither of these should be easier. That is, humans should always have the opportunity to be happy, but the right to feel miserable, if that's their thing, if that's the experience they want to live. And so when we're talking about universal ideas like the universal basic income, which, if you follow some of the other videos I've made, I pretty much explained that this is a bit like the same as the way our body works and how red blood cells distribute energy in the body. Each of your cells receives the amount of energy it needs to do whatever it has to do. But that doesn't mean there are dysfunctions at time. That doesn't mean that your body always 100% functions optimally. There are always little, some cells that either don't receive any oxygen and then die because of some dysfunction or whatever. So it's not perfect. And perfection, the fact that we're kind of seeking after this perfection, but even in a global organism like our own body, which is pretty damn perfect, near perfect, it is not absolutely perfect. There's always this element of freedom, almost like respecting free will. That free will exists in our cells as much as at our level. That even our cells, even though our body is geared towards making sure that each cell thrives and receives what it needs to do, what it has to do, even those cells can decide that they're not going to receive any oxygen. They're going to, for some reason, they're not going to get the oxygen, they're going to die. And that is an experience they can make in the body, and it won't affect you and your experience disproportionately but those cells have to have that freedom to experience that. And so by the same token, if you have a universal basic income, it shouldn't be like $2,000 a month. It should be something along the lines of more like $300 or $400. And of course, you would protest by saying, well, wait a minute, that's not even enough to survive. That's barely enough to eat. And you would be right, but this is not really a universal basic income. It's more a universal dividend. You'd have to look into various articles that I've written on Medium about this. And it's a completely different financial system where you can get more money and more income simply through the number of exchanges that happen daily. That is, if everybody receives $400 a month, and you break that down to, say, $10 a day. If you have 3 people in an economy and they exchange those $10 and trade things between each other, then don't forget that at the end of the month, if you make an addition to the actual amount that they got, it will be those $300 or $400 multiplied by the number of exchanges that happened. So if those $10 went in a circle 2 times during the day, then they will have multiplied the amount that they received ultimately by 3 or 4 times. And so what this means is that those $300 or $400 are more a way for each person to be able to vote every day on what they find is meaningful or has value. And some people, of course, that decide to do nothing might be miserable. They might feel like they're left out. But at any point in time, they can decide to join back into the economy and try to provide something meaningful to others and meaningful to them. And they will get, or they will capture part of that money that is being distributed to every single person, and they'll be better off. So it's about breaking this vicious cycle where the poorer you get, the more, I mean, if you're poor, it's easier to get more and more poor as you get poorer, and it's easier to get richer and richer as you get rich. You break this, and you provide an instrument for people to be either miserable or happy or whatever they want to be. You free them to experience whatever they want to experience without judging what they're actually experiencing. And so this whole idea of in spirituality that everybody will be happy, it's contrary to the laws of nature. It's contrary to freedom and free will, because ultimately the freedom to be miserable is as much part of a human freedom as any other freedom, and people should have the right to experience that. So I hope you found this interesting. It's probably a little break from my more esoteric talks, and happy to get your feedback and comment back.